I'd like to ask audience two questions, one for fun, the other one is more serious. So the first question, do you think the US decision by holding Huawei not participating in 5G in US, and they tried to do it blocking in Europe too, does it does it make America, does it impede China's technological advance? Do you think it stopped China from becoming more advanced technologically? Raise your hand if you think they do. Anyone? Few, okay. My second question, this is more fun. I just want to know, last month they released the new Terminator movie. So I want to know, what is the public view for the next 50 years? Will the human race work with robots, or the robots, basically Skynet take over us? That's my question. So who do you think Skynet will win? Raise your hand if Skynet will win.
I haven't seen the movie.
One? Okay. Two. Okay, then everyone, so the human race is safe. John Connor saves the day. So that's good. Okay, so why do we have this discussion? As you can see, for the past 20 years, technological advance have moved rapidly. I'm from PwC. I lead the robotic process automation in PwC. I can see what robots can do. Things that used to be done by human in 30 minutes, robots can do it in seconds. But with technological advancement, unfortunately, there is a side effect. We talk about the social side effect and also about the political side effect. Everyone thinks that technological advance only is a zero-sum game. If I win, no one can, you lose, that kind of thing. So today, we are very fortunate to have this very strong panelists with us. As everybody knows, His Excellency Pak Rudiantara, former Minister of Telecommunication and Informatika, and currently the CEO of PLN. Iya kan, Pak? Is it official, Pak, or belum? The second, we have His Excellency Dr. Peter Skov. He is the current ambassador of Germany to Indonesia, Timor-Leste, and ASEAN. Third, we have Simon Lacey. He is a research fellow for China International Business and Economic Law from University of New South Wales. He is also currently the VP Global Government Affairs for Huawei Technology. Lastly, we have Dr. Karthik Natchiapon. He is the research fellow at Institute of South Asia Studies at National University of Singapore. Let me begin with easy question first. What is the most consequential innovation that will impact human race in the next 50 years?
Is that working? Yep. Look, I think it's quantum computing. If I had to choose, quantum computing.
Okay. Anyone?
Did I steal anything?
Well, you did. I was going to say the same thing. I think quantum computing is going to be way more important than it is now, because in its core ability to break down bits into much smaller parts, so that we can essentially look at the molecules and the molecular structures in how we make resources and materials going ahead in the next century, which is why, and the notion of qubits, which is quantum bits, is going to be absolutely vital in the next 10, 15 years.
But also what it's going to do to encryption is very important as well.
Pak Rudiantara?
I think on top of the one, O2, I think is the capability of the processor itself, and the people in putting everything in the new algorithm. That is something that will change our quote-unquote near futures.
Mr. Ambassador?
As the only non-expert on these various forms on technology, I have the easy task to just remember what my briefing notes told me. And I think the answer was quantum computing.
Okay, next question. What worries you about this new technologies? What it affects the human race?
Well, look, I think we've already elucidated on why we think quantum computing is going to be such a breakthrough. I think in terms of the immediate impact on the human race, of course, AI is going to be huge, and that's going to be from both the impact that's going to have on a lot of kind of white collar middle class jobs, and how that's going to affect the underlying dynamics of production and consumption and where these markets are located. So if you look at what globalization and technology have done to manufacturing in the last sort of 20 years, where we've had a lot of kind of blue-collar jobs disappear from advanced industrialized countries, the big exception actually being Germany, because it has a lot of advanced manufacturing that hasn't kind of been offshored. But what we've seen in manufacturing, we're going to see in a lot of office jobs and educated professional jobs.
So, I mean, if you look at quantum computing, the thing that worries me the most is that most of the research is happening in two countries, the United States and China. And the amount of money that both these countries are spending in developing quantum computers and applying it when the time comes will be very important. So the notion of control, the fact that these technologies will remain in certain countries, will create and exacerbate existing gaps between them and a lot of the other nations in the world. So you're going to see if you think there's a big AI gap between US, China, and a lot of these other countries, with quantum computing, that gap is going to become even wider. So that really worries me.
Pak Rudiantara?
I think what makes me worry is the illiteracy of the peoples. They are not aware the development of the technology, the new technology, the capacity that will provide us something that unthinkable. Yeah. I'm happy that we met with the legitimate owner of the futures of Indonesia, with the younger generations, with the millennials. I always spend my time for Indonesian millennials, because I want to make them literate on what is going on, what is coming soon. On technology, the reason is for Indonesia in particular. Indonesia is not the country that inventing the technology. We are not the one who, quote unquote, manufacturing the latest technology. But at least if we are able to position ourselves that we are a good user, that we always can add the value of every business processes of our lives, maximizing the use technology, I think that's enough for the time being. Yeah. Of course, I think every country, every people has a dreams that every countries in Southeast Asia, in Asia, in Europe, everywhere and we have to produce the new technologies or something like that. I'm not trying to be an utopia in this case, but at least if we are able to maximize the use of the technology itself to the benefit of our people, I think that is my immediate objective.
Before I say what worries me, I think it is also necessary to call into memory all the things that where we can benefit from all these innovations. And I believe that before we talk about the problems, I see that there are huge benefits if we talk about, for example, a country like Indonesia, the attainment of the SDGs. I think there is a strong contribution that can be made both in terms of attainment of prosperity, in terms of liberate people to do things that set them free, in terms of doing good things for the environment, if we think all about the technologies in smart cities and so on. So I think that should be the starting point. Now, what worries us, and I speak here as a representative of a European, of a Western, quote-unquote, liberal democracy, I think there are three main clusters of issues that are discussed regarding all this new technology. The first is that we have to explain to our citizens in democracies, or politicians who want to be re-elected have to explain to their citizens how these systems can operate in a way that makes our citizens feel secure. The questions that you have very often in public debates, even in families, is are we really able to control this at some point, or are we going to be controlled, as you put it, by robots? The second thing, of course, and this is a very political issue, are the manifold abuses of these new technologies that we are witnessing, especially in democracies, in the terms of election mingling, fake news, social bots, all the things you can do on social media. And this is, of course, becoming an increasingly important issue in all our open societies, like in Indonesia, but also, of course, in Europe. And the third thing I would say, speaking from a European perspective, is something that is maybe not so much on the minds of people here, and that is the issue of ownership of our data. We in Europe are different from, I think, people in other parts of the world. I had the chance to travel a little bit last year in Latin America, and I was really surprised how freely people share their data and their location algorithms on their smartphones. In Europe and Germany, you know, we have this new data protection regulation that was an issue of great controversy for some time, and there was also a lot of criticism against it. But if you look now at the discussion in at least in my country, most people think that yes, we can handle that, and yes, it is a very good thing to have the mechanism which, at least at a minimum, enables me as the owner of my data to allow these data to be shared to others. So I think these are the three things that I would mention as issues.
The panelists here bring up two very good points, which is the monopoly of technology and also the role of government and technology. But I'm curious, what is your view of monopoly of technology and the law of comparative advantage? And number two is also, regulation is always two steps behind from innovation, right? How do government create a regulations that protects the citizens, but at the same time do not impede the technological progress? What is your view on that?
Okay, on the regulations toward the technology, you know. Number one, even during my tenure as the ministers in the Ministry of ICT, we shifted the positions of the government. Formerly, the role of my ministry was only as regulators, dealing with all regulation. I said, forget it. We are dealing with the younger generations. Yeah. If we still have to issue the regulation, has to be the light touch regulation. Cannot be heavy-handed regulation. Come on, guys, bro, sis, yeah. You are the millennials in Indonesia. You can feel. Yeah. Even my son complained to me, Dad, old school. We are millennials, you know. You cannot regulate us, yeah. Like this one, you know. So that's why we have to issue the what you call is the lightest regulations. Starting 2017, yeah, I still remember the numbers. I only issue the regulations in the ministry in 2018 only around 39 something, 39, yeah, exactly. But I deactivated more than 80 regulations. My rule is if I issue the new regulation, I have to kill 3 or 4 old regulations. And we shift the the role of the government from regulators only to become the facilitator, to provide facility to the people, to younger generations, and even further, yeah, to accelerate the use of technology in Indonesia. So that is the roles of the government has to be shifted, not only in my ministry, but also in most ministry during the first cabinet of Pak Jokowi. And we don't have to worry on technology. In the past, I almost went to München, so that's why I love Bayern München, Peter. Now we have different football club. He's with the Borussia Dortmund, while I'm with the Bayern München. Now, I went to Bayern every year and enjoy the Oktoberfest. Why? Because Germany with Siemens is considered one of the top manufacturers in the telecommunication during that era. But where is Siemens right now? Nokia, yeah, still there. Ericsson still, but they're not dominating. Japan, where is an ANC right now? America, where is Motorola? So the world is changed. Now we have our friend from Chungguo, from Shenzhen actually, with Huawei. And in Indonesia, infrastructures of telecommunication, cellular in this case, ICT in general, are dominating by the Chinese product, either Huawei or ZTE. And I do believe in the next 10 years, there will be also the challengers to Huawei. Yeah, so we don't have to worry on that one. But the most important thing for Indonesia, in this Indonesia context, yeah, we should not position ourselves to be a Huawei in the global sense. What is the difference between those countries with Indonesia? Number one, we have market. Number two, we have populations. I always bring us into 10 years down the road, 2030. What will happen 2030 in Indonesia? Number one, Indonesia will be in the peak of the bonus demography. Indonesia will have at least 140 millions middle class income populations, which is bigger than any populations in ASEAN countries. That will make Indonesia different. Yeah. Younger populations. I discussed even with Japan. Japan has the money, but you don't have the market because you're aging countries. Yeah. So why don't you Japanese put your investment in Indonesia? That's what I said to Japanese, So this is in the context of Indonesia. So that's why the government facilitate the younger generation to maximize the use of technology, to create more apps, to come up with the new business process, to disrupt every business processes, to disrupt government business processes, with the new business processes that provide us more efficiency by using the technology. Technology to me is not everything, but the people behind technology is the most important things. Who are they? We are the people who are sitting in this room. Thank you.
Okay. Simon, Peter, if you have...
That was such a masterful monologue. I just don't know how I would follow.
That's the Leonardo da Vinci.
I hope somebody wrote that down.
Karthik,
So I think your regulation will always be constrained by politics and how much politics allows for regulation to happen. So I study how India is regulating these new technologies, and the Indian experience. One good thing about that was now India is coming out with a new bill to regulate data. The process has been a multi-stakeholder process. So the regulators were involved, the private sector companies, both foreign and domestic, civil society groups and individuals were involved, citizens were involved, states where a lot of these technologies are having effects were brought into the process. So that allowed for a lot of different voices and opinions to enter the room and inform the process of regulation. I think that's a lesson that a lot of other Asian countries can take upon as we move to regulate issues like data and AI, is make it multi-stakeholderish and bring people from a lot of different sectors who are affected by these technologies in different ways to come into the process. Otherwise, there's a fear that special interests will capture regulation, and then you could have various effects from that. So yeah.
One important point to note is, as the network architecture transitions more to a software-based model, the importance of hardware is diminishing, and that opens up different sort of points of egress into value chains and different opportunities for new players to become, or new markets or new actors to become serious players, even if they don't have a large domestic market or manufacturing capability. If they have programming capabilities, then they can jump into that space. I think the process you're describing sounds great from the perspective of legitimacy, of course, but it's very slow moving, right? So if you look at the example of what happened in Kenya. So Kenya now leads the world in mobile payments together with China, and there was Safari.com, which is one of the operators, big customer of Huawei, came up with this sort of mobile wallet. It was 2G technology, very low tech, that allowed people to sort of transfer money to one another. It's called M-Pesa. And at the beginning, the financial regulator didn't really know what to do with this thing, so they sort of said, we'll give it 6 months and see how it goes. And it became such a hit that, after 6 months, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. So after 6 months, they had to kind of let it go. And it's, now you're in a situation where you've got something like a third of Kenya's GDP is transferred over this network. So the process-based legitimacy maximizing multi-stakeholder consultation process is very important, but you've also got to realise the value of the regulatory sandbox. And the regulatory sandbox involves risks, especially in prudential risks in the financial services sector, for example. But governments need to be willing to take that. Now, look, I wonder how well Indonesia is regulated in terms of the digital economy, because you do have some really great startups here like Tokopedia and some unicorns. But I remember last time I was living in Indonesia, I remember reading about these razzias that were being run against Uber drivers, right? And Jakarta and Indonesia, to its credit, didn't ban Uber, whereas other countries did. Taiwan banned Uber for a while.
London just banned Uber.
Yeah, Manila, right? So, but still, there was a bit of pressure on. There was some regulatory pressure. It wasn't a free for all, and I also remember seeing images of sort of Gojek drivers being beaten, in the early days of Gojek. I think those problems have been overcome now, but I think you need to weigh up the benefits of multi-stakeholder process-based legitimacy enhancing consultation versus regulatory sandbox.
One question that hasn't been answered: the monopoly of technology. If I'm China or if I'm United States and I invest money on new technology, why can I monopolize it?
No, look, there's a really great book by Peter Thiel, right, called From Zero to One. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but in that book he talks about the Pareto power principle, where, and that's an economic theory that was developed by an Italian economist to help explain why 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the people. And it seems to be that, there's this dynamic of 20% of the people are producing 80% of the productivity, etc., in a business, and it sort of seems to play out across the whole economy. And so what you've got in the digital space is you've got these really big companies like Facebook, like Google, like Microsoft that have managed to sort of capture an enormous amount of market share. It's not always a first mover advantage, it can be second mover advantage, but you do have these massive power asymmetries that have formed in the digital economy that are clear to everybody and are obvious to everybody. But you've also got a lot of space for startups to come and disrupt established players. So look at what happened in Southeast Asia with Uber and Grab, or in China with Uber and Didi. So local startups were able to beat Uber at its own game, and so the digital economy, even though it does kind of enhance these inherent power asymmetries that we have, it also provides space for disruption. So this issue of monopoly, I think yes, it is a potential issue that regulators need to deal with, but it's not as bad as what we saw in the old days of where John Paul Getty managed to monopolize the railway network of the United States and other, because there aren't that many kind of gatekeepers. Like the power of gatekeepers in the digital economy is not as strong as in the regular economy. I don't know if that answers your question, but I talked for so long that I've actually even forgotten what your question was.
Can I say a word about this question of regulation? You said at the beginning, en passant, that regulators, they always run behind, and that is true to a certain extent. I think the dilemma of regulators these days is, at least in my world, in Europe, that regulators have to respond to two objectives at the same time. There is a big demand to regulate what you call the empowerment of the digital world. In Germany, for example, you know this probably as much better than I do, but I mean the broadband coverage in Germany, although we have this image, is actually quite mediocre, so there's a lot of things to be done. I think there are a lot of questions how the empowerment of the digital world can be combined with our labor laws, with our social cohesion and so on. And that is one thing. And at the same time, because the development is going so unbelievably fast, we have the same regulators have to do the control part. And that is a big dilemma. And then on the third part, and the third issue is that on top of this comes this whole, we can speak about the elephant in the room here, the whole question of politics, of geopolitics. To what extent the 20th century was the century of the hot wars, and to what extent wars are going to be fought in technological rivalry in the 21st century. So on these three levels, governments are really in a big dilemma these days of how they could respond to all these objectives at the same time.
Pak Rudiantara, any other comments on the monopoly of technology?
With regulator?
The monopoly of technology by limited countries?
I'm not worried on the so-called monopoly technology, because technology can only be applied if business-wise feasible. If we don't have any feasibility from the technology, particularly in Indonesia, where the ICT sector actually driven by the private. So private is only see the financial feasibility or business feasibility. If they don't see any financial feasibility, they won't adopt the technology. So for instance, 5G. Right now, Indonesia, we are not there yet for 5G. Now, the reason, who will buy the 5G in Indonesia? 5G will provide 10 times speed. But when I ask you guys, what is your willingness to pay? This will provide 10 times faster. So you will. This is going to be guaranteed. There will be no buffering when you download the movie. Yeah? But will you pay 3 times of the current price you pay right now? Will you see? So this is the consumer market. Yeah,
You guys are, maybe we found the really cheap consumers all here.
No, those are the millennials. Those are I consider my friends here that you are the middle class income in Indonesia. People who are not thinking on what I have to do today in order for me to have something to eat. Yeah? So I'm not worried on the monopoly of on the technology, because we are driven by the business here. Of course, the 5G, I think the only foreseeable feasibility right now is in the business or corporate market, because to the business they don't care on cost as long as their revenue is double than their cost, they will be more than happy to accept that one.
I mean,
So, just one troubling aspect of the monopoly of regulation is that it leads to a monopoly of technological jurisdiction as well. So most of the major big tech companies are American, and the laws that most of them generally adhere to are also American, even though they operate all over the world. Now, that really creates a problem when they're operating in Asian countries, for example, and their platforms are having social effects that are harmful. In that case, who does Google, Facebook, Amazon, Google, or Twitter responsible to? If a lot of Asian countries do not have adequate laws to manage the effects of these technologies, you cannot keep relying on American laws, which are designed to address problems in the American jurisdiction. So that's a problem that I think we need to be a little bit more conscious of when we talk about the control of technology as well, because these technologies adhere to certain laws and rules that are not global in nature.
Kartik, you bring up a really good example. What happened to 737 MAX accident is a lot of the testing, safety testing, used to be done by government, but because of technological advance, they don't know the know-how. They give all the testing to Boeing with disastrous consequences. So my question is also, how do government employees, government catch up with new technologies and understand what technology does to day-to-day living?
okay, look, so before we get on to the whole Boeing 777 MAX thing, which I thought was a very interesting question, I did want to respond to what you said about monopoly of regulation. So if you look at American technology companies, so look, I think it's a little bit more complex. So we're a global multinational, and we have to comply with the laws in each country as they apply. You do have different regulatory standards in different markets, right? So in Germany, for example, you can't advocate publicly in favor of Scientology, or you can't deny the Holocaust, right? You can't do this. But in America, this is covered by your First Amendment rights. In the US now, they're struggling to grapple with the issue of fake news, deep fakes, and how this affects election outcomes. The real battle where this is being fought actually right now is over how to tax the digital economy. And so you're seeing this kind of head-to-head between France and America, where France wants to impose this sort of digital services tax on companies like Google and Facebook.
Indonesia too.
Right. And the US is stringently opposed because its tech lobby has sort of convinced USTR that this is a direct attack on US comparative advantage. And so this is really where you're going to see this unfolding. And now the issue is actually whether or not to impose customs duties on electronic transmissions and downloads. And so at the WTO, we've had this thing called the moratorium on customs duties, which was first agreed in 1998, I want to say, and has been continuously renewed at each ministerial conference, and is now going to expire at the end of this year. And the next ministerial conference is actually not until May next year. And so there's going to be this lapse where in theory, governments are going to be free to impose customs duties. And so a couple of governments are really leading the charge on this, South Africa and India. And they're arguing, and they're arguing very sensibly, that, look, in 1998, when we imposed this moratorium, when we agreed to this moratorium, no customs duties on digital downloads, the digital economy was still pretty small. Now the digital economy is massive, and it just no longer makes sense to give this huge sector of the economy what essentially equates to a tax holiday, right? Now, getting back to the 777, I think there the problem is regulatory capture, right? So if you look at the outcome of the financial crisis, where the guys who'd actually caused the problem were the biggest beneficiaries of the bailout that sort of saved the financial system. And when you look at the way the US regulatory structure is set up, and the revolving door, where people come from industry and then they go into the regulatory agency that's supposed to oversee that industry, of course there are conflicts of interest. What you're also talking about is the lack of technical capacity to be able to, right? And so Huawei has actually dealt with that issue, right? Because we set up these sort of independent cybersecurity evaluation centers in places like England, most recently Germany actually, and Canada. And what we do is we sort of offer to fund those, but the government has to produce the technical capacity to be able to run them and have engineers that have the capability to review our code and those sort of things. But not all countries have that capability, of course. So that's a real problem. But that's why the standard setters in the world are mostly advanced industrialized countries, or countries with the requisite technical expertise, and the standard followers are those that don't have that expertise, right? You're not going to change that overnight.
Pak Rudiantara, what about Indonesia, Pak?
I'm not worried on what you said on basically these fiscal issues or tax issues. Why? Even right now, the OECD's countries, they have not made decision how are going to apply the tax on these digital things. Why do we have to worry? Of course, doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything. This is some small examples. Yeah. So we are shifting from the technology, hardware, software, and I'm going to the higher level, which is applications, which is right now from social media still dominating by the America, whether Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, Google's things, and they have the business in Indonesia. This is our experience, because my friend from the tax office would like to apply the concept of the PE, permanent establishment, or in Indonesia call it Badan Usaha Tetap. I didn't understand what kind of animal is PE. So that's why I asked my friend, which is the principal tax of PwC, to teach me on the PE. Yeah, permanent establishment. It took me 2 hours. That even make me confused. No, because we have to take into account into the tax treaty between Indonesia and other countries or something like that. Why don't make it simple, I said. Because we have a friend in Google, and we talked to Google, to the headquarters. Sergey came even to my office, and we took a picture together, something like that, And do you have a willingness to pay the tax in Indonesia or not? Because you conduct the business in Indonesia. Yes, of course, he said. Because you are a public company. If I make a noise in Indonesia, that will affect your reputation. Of course, you would like to settle. Okay. Why don't we sit down together and find a way how can we Indonesia tax you? And we come up into the idea having some sort of the reseller concept. Now Google has an office in Indonesia 100% owned by Google. And they sell an advertising on YouTube, on any Google platforms. They will collect the payment from Indonesians, number one, in rupiah. And we Indonesian also have to pay the VAT. This is one of the solutions. But this solution is not based on the global practice. This is a solution based on the willingness of the parties. Now, if Google are able to do this in Indonesia, why don't you to another platform? So this is this kind of approach. Why we dare to do this? Because we have the market. We have a sizable market. I talked to my colleagues, the minister from Thailand, and Philippines as well. How did Indonesia do that? Why don't you piggyback me? Why don't you piggyback Indonesia? We are only representing 40% of the market in ASEAN out of 600 million. Yeah? 260 out of 600 million, yeah? It's around 40%. Why don't you piggyback in? And they send the people to Indonesia. If Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and in Vietnam, I'm not saying forget it Singapore, Pak. Singapore is still the hub for technology, but this is on the market. So we have bargaining power to deal with those platforms, not only in terms of the text, also in terms of managing the content. How we have to ask them to activate more their capability on the artificial intelligence, on the machine learning, to address, to fight the issue of hoaxes in this country. So this is the Indonesia experience, and we have to do it not only by Indonesia. We have to team up. I think in this morning session, Pak Dino Patijalal as well as Ibu Retno said in their speeches, saying that we have to team up. We cannot do by ourselves. At least Indonesia, ASEAN, and later on probably with South Asia or East Asia or something like that. Number of people matters. Market is really matters. Thank you.
Peter,
I think listening to you, I fully subscribe what you said at the very beginning, that of course the digital literacy is something that we have to put in the center of our education systems. But let me come back to the issue, to the question of how and why do we have to accept monopolies, because I think that all these interventions that we heard, they sound very sensible, but I wonder whether we are really able and willing to speak out what we're really talking about. I mean, first of all, I think we are at a level of the development of technology which is going to be changing our lives much more fundamentally than the innovations we have seen, let's say, in the last 60, 70 years. And it will have great consequences, as we know. And the other thing is that, of course, and I would like to bring in politics here. I mean, at the end of the Cold War, there was this famous American professor, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote about the end of history, that we will all end up in a consensual world of liberal democracies where we share values and everything would be okay. And of course, if we were in such a world, maybe we wouldn't have this kind of issues and controversies that we have now. But the fact of the matter is the world has become a multipolar, very messy world, and with a lot of competition. And also the humankind has learned about the mechanisms of power. About the power of radiance of Coca-Cola, of Boeing, and of course he or she who will own the monopoly of technological know-how at that level, as we are discussing here, will control, of course, much more than just his immediate sphere of influence. So, I mean, for big players, this is, I think, the central question, and I believe that from that point of view, what you see is these claims to monopoly, which is basically one coming from China, which is basically a monopoly that is based on the legitimacy of supposedly own genuine research and technological advancement. Then you have a claim to monopoly from the US, which is nowadays based certainly also to a certain extent on the power of the argument of extraterritorial, you know. So, I mean, there are various models on which the actors try to claim and to defend their legitimacy of their, claims to monopoly. And I believe there's a big lack of consensus. And then, of course, if I may just, as a footnote, I mean, it is really not worth more than a footnote, talk about Europe, where we are sort of in the midst of it, because we have this very complicated public societies, constituencies, with a lot of skepticism against technology that you don't find to that extent in other circles. And of course, the immediate reaction is, well, how can we let this happen, that there are two spheres of influence on this issue just develop themselves and we are doing nothing? And this is why I think what you are going to see as a result of the quite controversial discussions that we witness at this very moment on 5G in our European countries, you will probably see the emergence of a mainstream that we should have, like a European, some people call it an Airbus moment, where we have to really take a strategic decision which leaves competition rules, maybe our internal competition rules aside, and really looks at the issue in a strategic way and not in a market-oriented way only.
My last question to all the panelists: how do you decouple technological innovation and country rivalries?
Well, look, I don't think you can. I mean, I think I think it's certainly the case that the US views its military advantage as very closely linked to its technological leadership. And because of the inevitable fusions between civilian and military technologies, there's going to be tension there. I think the way to overcome this is to force countries to cooperate with one another at the international level, like we've done in places like the WTO, and to build trust in that way.
Karthik?
Well, I mean, I'm just going to piggyback on what Simon says. It's going to be hard because I think technology is integral to economic security and national security now in most countries. So the answer is global governance. Global governance, either through norms or standards on all these issues that we talked about, and norms and standards that are not binding enough that allows countries to exit the table. So keep it open, have some space for global standards that apply across national jurisdictions, but allow countries also to manage the issue domestically. Yeah.
I probably must say that it is improbable to decouple it, because technology is not a standalone issues. As mentioned as well, there is an economic issues, there is political issues, there is relationship issues. If we have a good relationships, and we are okay in anything, probably we don't have any issue from the technological point of view. But look at the current situations in say between America and China on the technology. Is it pure technology? No, because when I consult with my colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, now I got the information from both parties. Rudy, Indonesia should not do this because blah 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 blah, and from other parties as well, Rudy, Indonesia should not do this because of blah 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 blah. And I consult with my friend because I'm not good in diplomacy. So that's why I consult with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I didn't get any answers from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I said, and I make my conclusion that it is almost improbable. It's not impossible, but improbable.
Well, I think for the time being, I don't really see how we can decouple it. I think that what you said about global governance is the only game in town that we have at the moment. There are these initiatives in the G20, for example, Think 20, which is the attempts to define at the G20 level, at the global governance level, some common rules, but we have to see how far we go. What I could imagine is that we will see this rivalry on this on the 5G technology and everything that can result from it. That we're going to see a rivalry between 3, 4, 5 actors. That we're going to see probably for business not very productive solution, because this is going to be, of course, more costly to everybody. And what I could imagine, but then I will be retired for a long time, is that a world where the actors will realize the cost of this rivalry. and that then there will be a moment when you find this consensus that might prevail. And when this moment will come, well, that's open.
I have 15 more questions, but unfortunately, they already given me time is up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. One question from the gentleman in blue.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Wildan Akbar. I'm from Indonesian Defense University. First, I want to thank you from Mr. RR that allow me to do a research in Minister of ICT last year. I want to ask Mr. Simon Lacy about how our country defends with from the quantum computing and the artificial intelligence. As we know that Indonesia have issue with the hoax, and our digital literacy is very low. How we defend or how do we protect our people about that?
No, well, I think Indonesia is quite well placed, in internationally to be able to compete in this space, just because you have this sort of ecosystem of programming talent, which sort of clusters around the Bandung Institute of Technology, which is why Apple, opened this this R&D center here for app development and stuff. And so really, what countries need to be able to compete in that space is really strong STEM skills, particularly science and math. And so, one really interesting part of Huawei's story is that we have a research center in Moscow, which does a lot of our mathematical algorithms. I mean, the best way to move data across networks, the most efficient way, that's really down to mathematical algorithms. And this is why India has also been able to position itself so strongly in the digital economy, because they have very strong math and programming talent. And so really it's just about developing that talent pool that you already have, and then with the right business environment and access to capital and right entrepreneurs, then you can position yourself very well in the quantum computing space.
Next question.
Thank you for the chance to ask the question. My name is Ilsa. I'm from International Development Law Organizations. I would like to ask a question for Mr. Simon Lacy and Mr. Ambassador Peter Schaaf. My first question is for Mr. Simon Lacy, is actually how businesses need to adhere to countries' data protection and privacy law. Because, for example, in Indonesia, like Pak Rudiantara said, that we have such a large market here for technological advances and digital companies, but with all due respect, Pak Rudiantara, we still have so much work to do on the data protection regulations. So how do businesses act as it is being monopolized by private companies? How do these businesses actually needs to adhere to the data regulation protections to each countries? And second question is for Mr. Peter Schaaf. I think we talk lots about data protections, but I like to have a glimpse on actually human capital. Germany is actually known for technological advances in its country, but how do Germany actually also manage their human capital to be as advanced as the technology itself? Thank you.
So thanks for the question. Huge fan of IDLO. Actually have a friend working there. So look, I mean, the way we do it is, of course, we have to comply with the laws in every country as they apply. That's what I've said before, and we're no different from any other company that has to do that. But one thing that we've all had to do now for about 2 years in the company is we have to do an annual test on GDPR, and we all have to basically pass a GDPR test and show that we understand the GDPR. And so what the EU has done here very successfully is to sort of export its data privacy rules. And look, there's a lot of discussion on, just how good the GDPR is as a regulatory solution. There's been a lot of research that says it slows innovation and that sort of thing. But I think one of the really positive things that it does bring to the table is it looks at data in terms of, and privacy in terms of a human right. And I think it's at least started a conversation on what the value of data is and whether we need to take our data back, control of our data back. And so now other jurisdictions are following the EU. So California is about to enact a law that's very similar to GDPR. And so the easiest thing is just if everyone sort of gravitates towards this standard, and if a big market like Indonesia were to enact rules that deviated too strongly from GDPR, then it would really undermine its attractiveness as a place to locate businesses, right? So right now we're living in a world that's gravitating more towards GDPR, and countries are sort of figuring out how they can become interoperable with GDPR, which is what the Americans are doing with Privacy Shield, and what other countries are doing with these bilateral or unilateral equivalency declarations. So that's how we comply, really. Yeah.
Well, to the second question, before I do this, I would just like to make one quick footnote to the GDPR regulation of the EU. I mean, there was a lot of controversy when it was enacted, and I don't know the scientific evidence to what extent it slows down innovation or not, but it has certainly done one thing. It has brought the debate on this digital issues, of which privacy is only a part, to the center of our public discussion, and that, I think, has been a very positive effect. Now, to address your question, how do we combine our technological advance with a human capital agenda that doesn't, where I think that's your question, where the sort of short-term risks do not endanger the cohesion of the economy and of the society in general. And I would point here to one very specific German procedure that we apply, that pertains to our secondary education segments, because we have since 100 years in our system a so-called dual education stream, which is sort of organized for graduates, let's say at the age of 16, where they can choose either the immediate academic college career, or they go into some kind of technical and vocational education. And we have had, over the last decades, ups and downs in this. And there were times when, of course, especially in the baby boom generation, I mean, every parent thought the only way my child can obtain value is through academic education in a university. But of course, you have all these taxi drivers in Berlin and Munich who have studied philosophy and musicology and all these subjects, and find it difficult to meet ends at the end of the month. So I mean, there is, with the new stage of Industrial Revolution 4.0 now, a very new dynamism in this vocational education, where actually it is a big advantage that those people who feed into the curricula of the vocational education are those who are actually there, the engineers in the companies who say exactly what kind of working skills are needed. And so we have a very dynamic and successful interplay between technological curricula on the one hand and human capital on the other hand, and this has enabled us to see basically we have no unemployment at the moment. I cross my fingers that this stays, but of course theoretically all economists will tell you, and I've read also in the press in Indonesia about this, that there is of course a short-term risk of labor market costs that you might incur, although all experts are in consensus that in the end there will be a positive effect on the human capital.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, the time is up. Please give a warm applause to all our panelists. Thank you so much for coming.